All right, hello and welcome to the ACRL SPARC Forum on emerging inclusive access programs and their implications for course material affordability. I'm Nicole Allen, Director of Open Education for SPARC, and I have the honor of moderating this truly outstanding panel. This event today is co-organized with our partners at ACRL, and on behalf of SPARC, I just want to say how much we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with RESAC and ACRL to organize these kinds of forums on important topics to the library community, and we have a really great discussion ahead today. So our topic today is going to relate to the ongoing challenge of college course material costs, which many academic libraries have been on the front lines of working to solve. And historically, this problem has been about working to address the high cost of traditional textbooks and find ways around it. Through open educational resources, through course reserved, through sharing copies. But over the last few years, this landscape has really started to change. And the publishing industry has shifted to new models for selling and billing for digital textbooks. And at this point, just about every campus has probably heard from a publisher or a bookstore about the model that's known as inclusive access. And the model is designed to automatically charge the cost of digital textbooks through students' tuition and fees. And a lot of campuses have started to adopt this model, either on a small scale or a large scale, because the marketing pitch can sound pretty attractive. You know, faculty can keep using some of the traditional materials they use. The materials are digital and can appear to save students a lot of money. You know, all students get their materials on the first day of class and they get billed for it later. And depending on how it's set up, it can also secure additional revenue streams for the campus bookstore. But the realities of these programs have not been all they sound. There are a lot of logistical and administrative questions for how they're set up. The savings may not turn out to be as significant as they sound. Some courses, the ability to opt out isn't always an option when it's required to turn in homework or required coursework. And the shift to digital is starting to raise all kinds of questions about accessibility, the digital divide, and how publishers are extracting student data using these materials. So recognizing that libraries are on the front lines of promoting course material affordability, how do we navigate the growth of these kinds of programs that is being driven by the publishing and bookstore industry? I could say a lot more about the challenges of these programs, but the reality is we need to learn how to navigate them. And the conversation today is really focused around understanding how campuses across the country are beginning to grapple with the realities of inclusive access programs, how libraries are getting involved as advocates on campus to help make these programs better for students if possible, or mitigate some of the harms, and advice that maybe some of you can take away back to your campuses and engage in conversations if your campus is considering going in this direction. So we have three incredible speakers today that you will hear from. The first is Christine Monpoint, a student activist at Houston Higher Education Student Coalition and a former student government president at Houston Community College. Christine is going to go first and share the perspective of what students are going through with these kinds of programs and what you can think about with respect to the student perspective. Second, we will hear from Dr. Rebecca Karoff, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas System, who can provide the perspective of how a system is navigating the growth of inclusive access on universities around the state of Texas. And then finally, we will hear from Robert Butterfield, who's Director of Instructional Resources at the University of Wisconsin-Stout, who runs one of the nation's oldest fee-based textbook programs, developed long before inclusive access, to have an understanding of what a mature program that approaches course material costs as a fee might look like. So I will note before we invite our first speaker to start, we have enabled the chat, but we request that if you have questions for any of the speakers to please use the Q&A function to submit your question, and please specify which speaker the question is for. You will have time for speaker questions at the end. And then also note that we have enabled live transcript. If you would like to view captions, use the option on your screen. All right, without further ado, I will invite Christina to please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nicole, and it is an honor to be amongst other panelists who are doing the really important work of letting the community know and our leaders know what students definitely need when it comes to inclusive access. My name is Christine Montpoint, and I have a very interesting perspective on textbooks. I started college in 2015, and actually my first college class, I shared this with another member from the SPARC team yesterday, that I had an OpenStax OER textbook in my first college class. And then in another class, I had an inclusive access math course. And then in another class, I had like a traditional textbook. So in my first semester of college, I had all three like kind of ways that we have been discussing how you can receive textbooks in your course. And it was really an interesting opportunity as well, because that same semester I began working for the college bookstore. I worked for Follett Corporation for 4 years after that. And so I've always had a hands-on experience with the different ways that students interact with textbooks. It's the ways that students would come to the bookstore and talk about their experiences with textbooks, the way that students would come up to student government when I was a student body president for Houston Community College and talk about their experience. And so my personal experience with inclusive access, I think the most important thing is that students really don't understand what that means, what it is, what the different options are. Like when you look at the college freshman who comes in and gets all this different information, where are your classes, how to get help, you know, how do you get enrolled, all these different things. And then to pile on top of that about 9 different ways that you can access your textbook, it gets really, really confusing. And so for a very long time, I had thought that like, okay, well, inclusive access just seems easiest. Like if I can find a class that has inclusive access, I'm gonna take it because then I don't have to hunt down the textbook and make sure that it's not right, or, you know, all the challenges that you face when you go to the bookstore and you get a book and then the professor doesn't use it, but you can't return it. So like, that's how I felt for a very long time. And then I started to look at not just me as an individual, because I've been very, very fortunate to always have access to technology, always have access to Wi-Fi. I started looking at my peers amongst Houston Community College, in which we gave over $4 million away in technology assistance. And I started to think about those students. And I was like, man, if you don't have access to technology on a consistent basis, how do you complete your assignments? And that was the complaint. A lot of students who didn't have access to technology or Wi-Fi, and not even just like in their home, but in their area. Like they had to get on a bus to go somewhere else to complete this class because that was the only way they could pass the class. And campuses were closed during COVID. And I was like, wow, this is a much larger issue than going through a checkbox process in inclusive access and completing these assignments. And then also looking at, like, I have my brother who's also in college alongside me. He had passed the course itself, but he did not complete his inclusive access assignments on time. So they made him repeat the entire course. And I was like, well, that's frustrating because he didn't expect to fail. So he didn't purchase the extended version. So he had to purchase a whole new access to get into that class, to do the whole thing over again, just because he had missed a few assignments to complete on time. And so it really made me question, as a student, is the purpose of inclusive access for the student? Like, if you're failing a student who has passed the material, who's proven on tests that they can comprehend and, you know, execute the material, but you're failing them in the entire course because they didn't complete a few like multi-choice assignments, then how is this really measuring the success of the student? And so a lot of the experience in student government was, okay, well, let's turn our focus to open educational resources and really partner with, like, you know, the library and bring people in to discuss those things with us as the student government officers, so we can be advocates for that on the campus. Because it seemed to me that that was the most, it was the easiest for students. It was, you know, even if you didn't have internet access at that current moment, there's no assignments tied to whether or not you have the book, so you can make it to the library, you can work with a friend. A lot of it is a link where you can access it on your phone. So if you don't have like a laptop or a device, then it's not as restrictive to where you physically need a desktop or a laptop to computer to complete the assignment. And so I've been very fortunate in my experiences to kind of do my very thorough research and navigate what type of course materials would be used in a course. But even, for example, like I have a course that I'm taking this summer where the textbook was included, and they tacked it onto my account, and I was like, okay, that's fine. But then the professor emails me the first day and says, well, we're really not using the book. I've already taken the liberty of going through and giving a PowerPoint instruction of everything that you're going to need. So then I'm like, so why did I increase my student debt to put this book on there? And so I think that is the ongoing conversation and the ongoing thing. Like, I know when I worked for the bookstore, for example, there was always this back and forth between the bookstore needing the books at a certain date so that we can order them to have them ready for students in the classroom. Well, if faculty is still trying to figure out what they want to do and it's getting close to the date, then the bookstore just orders like a very low number of books so they don't have to worry about returning, which makes sense because it's a bookstore. It is a bookstore practice. Like, they don't want to have a ton of books that they need to send back if people are not purchasing them. But it's a lot of miscommunication on the back end. It doesn't seem very fair to the student. And working for the bookstore was one of my favorite jobs to this day. And I really enjoyed the fact that, unlike a traditional place of employment where you could, you wouldn't tell your competitors about other competitors, we were able to talk about in the bookstore, hey, try this, or here's an option, or if we don't have the book, look at this, and so I felt like working in the bookstore was a really great place to work, and I learned a lot about how to be knowledgeable for myself. But not every student at a college gets to work at the college bookstore, and so they don't get the hands-on understanding and experience of, okay, how do I navigate this to get my books and materials on time? And so I think all in all, for me, inclusive access, again, seems really good on paper. Just like when you market anything, you kind of give the statistics or history is told in the perspective of the victor. But I really think that conversations like this help students to better understand there are other ways that you can advocate to your faculty, to faculty senate, to different places about what is a more equitable decision for students, as opposed to, because inclusive access is easy, let's use it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing your perspective. And I know we already have a couple of questions in the question box, and we'll get to those after the speakers share their opening statements. So Dr. Karoff, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you see my slides?
Yes, but it's in presenter view.
Okay, so let's see. How's that?
No, I think you'll probably need to unshare the presentation and then restart it as a.
All right, sorry about this. I thought I set it up perfectly, but one doesn't somehow.
Yeah, well, I guess I just want to acknowledge the really important points that Christine made about the challenges that students face. Students are not a monolith. Students have go through many different circumstances and many different experiences, and no two students are the same. And I think, this is true, I guess, maybe across decisions that are made in higher ed. It often happens where the people making decisions aren't always thinking about the individual impacts it can have on students. And that's why the student voice is so important. So Christine, thank you for the work that you do in addition to being here.
I have a feeling you're still seeing presenter mode. Is that true?
It's perfect.
Good. Okay, great. Okay, well, good afternoon or morning to some of you, everyone. Really great to be here. Thanks, Nicole, for the invitation, and really appreciated Christine's viewpoints. And I am in the University of Texas system where I do a lot of things related to student success. And I want to talk about leveraging systemness for how we navigate the course materials landscape amid the growth of inclusive access. But because I'm in a system office, I'm not on a campus. I don't interact regularly with students. So I really appreciated the way Christine set us up. But I want to just begin by saying, when I talk about leveraging systemness, I really work very hard to be responsive and responsible in collaboration with our institutions as we navigate this landscape. And it really is very quickly evolving. I do feel like sometimes we're more in reactive mode than proactive mode, but that's okay. And I just want to focus on the ways in which we really try to be responsive and responsible to our students, knowing very deeply at very granular data-driven levels, who are they, what do they need, and what are they asking us to do and help and asking us for help with. And likewise to our institutions, where do they want support from system? Where don't they want support from system? And probably the list of things they don't want any intervention or help from system is bigger than the areas in which they do want help. And that when I talk about institutions, that includes faculty, that includes a lot of other different constituents and stakeholders. And then I always am guided by trying to be as equity driven and student centered as possible in all the work that we do. And I will say this, when we talk about being responsive, also, it's interesting where we have heard from institutions that they want a system level approach is around policy issues with inclusive access, and then broadly around open educational resources. And I am going to talk about OER in my presentation. And just very quickly, some UT system context and the kind of communities. Nicole asked us to think about the different communities that we work with as we collectively navigate this landscape. The UT system is large. We have 8 universities and 5 health institutions, over maybe almost 243,000 students, the large majority of which are undergraduates. And we have almost 51% of Hispanic and African-American students, with the majority of those being Hispanic, and almost 50% of our undergrads are Pell eligible. And that number will be much higher at certain campuses compared to others. And when I talk about communities, in my student success role and world, I convene all sorts of what I would call student success leaders working on a number of issues, including advising, transfer, learning loss, institutional readiness, and also OER. I work with faculty and curricular leaders, and we have some exciting grant work going on focused on redesigning curricula to make them more relevant, responsive, and inclusive. And I work beautifully and proudly with the library deans and directors across the UT system, who in some ways have taught me as much as anything, and as much as I know about OER comes from them, including OER librarians, but also vice provosts and dean level library directors. And they've just been a great group for me to get to know. They've sort of opened my eyes up to the ways in which libraries are just hotbeds of student success activity, working very hard to ensure that their students are well supported financially, academically, socially. In the UT system, we have 3 student success pillars focused on financial well-being, advising effectiveness, and social and academic belonging. And as I've already said, we try very hard to be equity-centered and data-informed as we work to improve student success and institutional effectiveness. So I want to focus a little bit more closely on that sort of actions. Course materials landscape in our system and Texas-wide is focused around policy, practice, and data. And I'll spend a little time on each of these topics, thinking about a UT system policy and then a statewide policy that have really sort of dramatically impacted the way we're navigating the landscape. Likewise, thinking about some of the institutional practice around inclusive access, but also UT system and institutional engagement around affordable course materials, including OER more broadly. And finally, I'll share a little bit of data. And the data piece is a work in progress, but we have some good data, and we can do a lot more with the data. So one of the things that the UT system has done is they passed a course fee policy in September 2020. And this is all about course fees and tuition. This is about tuition fees and transparency for our students and trying to make sense of the tuition and fee world for our students. We have always required certain kind of course fees to be reported to the UT system annually, semester by semester. And we now, starting in September 2020, we included inclusive access products in that policy. So that because inclusive access course materials are assessed as course fees, they need to be reported. And this policy recognizes that institutional and publisher efforts, they recognize actually good work by institutions and publishers to really lower the cost for students through discounted or inclusive access products. But it also recognizes, this policy, limitations that exist on student choice when you have an automatic billing program, and students really can't be successful in the course without, or expected to even reasonably participate and succeed without automatically purchasing these products. So it also, importantly, this course, if you include inclusive access and the course fee policy, you actually are enabling institutions and students to use federal financial aid to cover the costs in ways that didn't happen previously. We work hard around ensuring opt-out options for institutions and students to be aware of what they need to provide. This is part of the awareness building, and I think probably everyone in this Zoom room will sort of recognize there are challenges around the opt-out piece. So we also have, and I think I want to just give a shout out to SPARC for helping promote and publicize this incredible legislation that was passed in the 2021 session, HB 1027. And it's not often that I can say that Texas passed incredible legislation that should be exemplary for all of us, but you can say it with this bill. This requires institutions to provide clarity and transparency to students on the cost of their course materials in published course schedules. It requires, and it has, it's a complicated bill. It has all sorts of different components, but it's focused on disclosure of the fee amount, the student data terms of use, the opt-out procedures for course materials that will be automatically billed as well. So that it includes this requirement to publish course materials in course schedules. It includes inclusive access materials, obviously, and OER. This bill, when it went into effect last September, so September 2021, and full compliance is expected to be in place by this September 2022. It's a fantastic bill for students, lots of excitement. Our students at our different institutions were helpful in advocating for it. It is a really complex bill, as I said. It has generated a lot of implementation challenges. So as we think about at the system level, how we navigate the inclusive access landscape, I will say that last fall, provost came to us and said, we're having a lot of challenges figuring out how we implement this. Can system please convene a work group to address? So we love it when our campuses ask us to convene them as opposed to us convening them. Just for some of our own needs, but they came and said, can we get together? We put together a work group, and I want to just mention that the work group included a variety of roles, because it turns out there's a variety of roles and units and offices on a campus who are involved in implementing this bill. So the group included library deans and OER librarians and directors, vice provosts of enrollment management, of academic affairs, of curriculum effectiveness, of IT, and it included faculty. And some of the key challenges that I think are worth mentioning, I've listed them on the slide, but on some level, the integration of course materials in the LMS and the course scheduling software, that was a big issue at the outset. This group started meeting, I think, January, February of this year. What's interesting is by May, we had resolved, when I say we, the campuses, our institutions had resolved some of the really vexing challenges. It was interesting. They just needed to get together, share best practices, figure out their workarounds and their solutions. And they did in terms of the integration into the LMS, in terms of, lots of bookstore relationships are key to this. And we have institutions that have incredible working relationships with their bookstores, and we have some where that's not necessarily the case. So this need to really work with the bookstore, somewhat institution dependent on whether it went well or not. We realized that sometimes collecting the required information from publishers was easy. The large publishers could easily get it to the bookstore, whomever, focused around these kinds of products. Smaller publishers, not so much. The bill requirements were not aligned to the university course scheduling. This is probably just going to be an ongoing challenge. And we're always going to have sort of partial information at any given point in time because of this misalignment. And then other ongoing challenges are really just overall communication, making people aware. The faculty, not to sort of blame faculty just so many of them don't know about this. And we know that faculty will, sometimes you have these inclusive access purchasing programs that are institution-wide, and I'll talk about a couple of those, but often it's independent, faculty are independent people, and they go and make their own arrangement with a publisher. So getting faculty to be in compliance has been an ongoing challenge and will probably remain one. I will say at the moment, there's no state level enforcement in terms of like, we're going to check up on you, or often with state legislation, we have to report to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Not so for this bill. We'll see if in the next session they want to know how we're doing, but we're feeling really good across the system, thanks to all the people that we convened and who are working on figuring out how we do this at each, at the single institutional level. But we also have different kinds of engagement with inclusive access across the UT system, the practice piece. Interestingly, and we know this because we have this course fee policy in place. I don't think we quite understood this previously, although we tried to do some surveying in the past. But at the moment, only 2 of our 8 universities are reporting inclusive access usage through our UT system course fee policy. And we think we have a third one who is working with McGraw-Hill, and will probably do some inclusive access materials for maybe large enrollment or gateway courses. But at the moment, UT Austin has something called the Longhorn Textbook Access Initiative, which they have been proudly promoting, and I think it's working well with some limitations. And then UT Arlington is the other institution that's right now ramping up its usage around inclusive access. I have some data I could share. I'm not going to, but just how many courses, how many students in those courses, how many sections. We have some of that data because of our course fee policy. So in some ways, not system-wide, but what is happening system-wide is more engagement around just the affordable course materials and OER and other low-cost materials. We convened at the UT system. I convened and was co-chaired by the Dean of Libraries at UT San Antonio, an Affordable Learning Accelerator Task Force between February 2019 and August 2020. COVID kind of messed up some of what we'd hoped to do, but we did issue a report and recommendations to the chancellor in September 2020 that was very well received. It had some bold recommendations, including around funding. I will say we haven't gotten any funding, still working on that, and we'd like to. But this task force spent a lot of time talking about OER, and it spent a lot of time talking about those general kinds of course materials. And how we could ensure that there was greater affordability for our students moving forward. So we have a number of recommendations. The follow-on group to the task force is called what we call our Momentum on OER work group. It's a smaller group. My boss said, please don't convene another task force. So I didn't, but this more group, Momentum on OER group, it includes OER librarians, library deans and directors, faculty, an interim provost was serving and will continue to serve even though he's not in the provost role, and some other people who are really just focused on building intentionality in course materials selection and best practices in course materials disclosure, while also working very hard to advance OER. I'm almost done. So what do we know about how some of this is working? So I mentioned that we are always focused data-wise on the financial realities of our students and the impact finances has on their success. We do this in lots of different ways in different projects, not just something like OER, inclusive access landscape. We are very focused on, as our students go through our institutions into our majors, coming from, we have, probably almost half of our students are transfer students, lots of swirl in Texas with its, 7 university systems and 50 community college districts. So we know though, that the way they are able to successfully access, participate, persist in, and complete their educations has everything to do with their financial situation. So we pay a lot of attention to that. And as I've mentioned, our UT system course fee policy now allows us to track inclusive access usage by course, semester, year, numbers of students. That was not the design of the policy. It absolutely was not. This is about the course fee policy is about how we do tuition and fees in the UT system. And it's actually not my area at all, but we are able to see, at least now in ways we couldn't, what the growth is now, what it's going to look like moving forward. And I think this will be really helpful for us. I also received some outreach from some folks at McGraw-Hill who like to get together and talk with me and another colleague here at System on occasion. And I appreciate their outreach and their interest in working with us. They noticed that I was going to be on this panel and sent in some data for me, and I wanted to just reference it that, McGraw-Hill estimates cost savings to Texas students of over 12 million for their inclusive access products in 2021-22. That's a huge number. And then the UT Austin Longhorn textbook access initiatives. This data was also shared by the McGraw-Hill folks, and I wasn't able to independently confirm it with UT Austin. Not that I don't believe it, I just mean that I would need, if I'm sharing more about some things, I would want to make sure that's okay with UT Austin folks. But they estimated, or said that there are about over $680,000 of cost savings to students in just the first year of this Longhorn Texas textbook access initiative. I will say there's a lot of opt-out challenges remaining. Lots of students have been opting out from what I heard anecdotally. That's something they're trying to address, but it's something that we all have to sort of think about moving forward. But I also wanted to share some comparison data on OER and low-cost textbook savings to students from our campuses. And UT Arlington, which has really had some phenomenal OER work in place for, I don't know, I'm not even sure what time frame, 6-8 years. This past year alone, they saved $5.5 million using the SPARC formula, cost savings to students, both OER and low cost. And low cost is 25 and under. So I did ask, since Arlington also offers inclusive access products, I asked the fabulous OER librarian there, Jessica McLean, if in fact this number would include inclusive access. And she said she doesn't see how it can, because I don't think there are any of those products that are under $25. UT Rio Grande Valley also is now calculating cost savings for students, both through, they have an affordable textbook adoption grant program to faculty, and they do library licensed textbook replacement purchases. Since 2019, they've saved a total of over $621,000. Not sharing the UT San Antonio data, which was dazzling, about what was the total savings of over $10 million since 2016. And what's interesting, I mean, this will be true for inclusive access moving forward, the cost savings to students, and for the OER, these numbers are going to grow. These numbers are going to grow on both fronts. And I think it'll be interesting to try to have a handle as we move forward on tracking the data, thinking about where the impact is, thinking about where, from my perch at least, and collectively with our institutions, library folks, plus how do we leverage our system is to really make sure we're maximizing or actually reducing the financial impact around the textbooks and course materials landscape as we move forward. I'll stop there, but thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing that. And I think that this really highlights how right now gathering data is so important, and being able to understand how these programs are starting and how things may change over time, recognizing that prices typically go in one direction, and that is up. I also appreciate bringing in the comparison between OER and inclusive access savings. And I think it's really important to note that inclusive access savings are calculated off of using the same material and do not grow in the same way that open educational resources savings grow when you permanently replace a traditional material with open educational resources. So without further ado, I would like to move on to our last speaker, and afterwards we will have time for questions. So please do enter any questions you have for the speakers in the Q&A. I will invite Robert Butterfield to share his slides and take it away.
Guess I should unmute. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoy my very visually pleasing slides here that I've put together. So I just put this together so you have a little idea of who UW Stout is and where we're located, about an hour east of Minneapolis, St. Paul. I am Bob Butterfield, and I am the Director of Instructional Resources at the University of Wisconsin Stout. And I'm responsible for managing our centralized student-funded campus-operated textbook affordability program. This program has been saving our students money for over 120 years. And I want to take a few minutes and explain our approach to affordability, because it speaks to our experience and our experiences with inclusive access. So the Stout Affordability Program is unique. We are a department of the university library, but run more as a business concern. My background is retail management. And we have to earn our revenue through student fees. We provide the vast majority of our campus's curricular content, regardless of format, type, or the quantity assigned. If a student is assigned 10 books for a course, they pay only one fee. If they're assigned digital and want print, or if they are assigned print and want digital, they only need to come and see us, and we put that book in their hands in that format with no extra charge. And we not only work closely with our student senate, but we're answerable to them for changes in fees and any changes to the services we provide. And my office's sole purpose is to assure that students have access to all of their assigned materials on day one at the lowest possible cost. So what does our fees look like? Here's a snapshot of what students currently pay. The last 5 years, we've seen 3 years that have no increase, a 0% increase in fees, and 2 years where we actually reduced fees by 12.5%. The 2023 academic year is going to see our 4th no increase year in the last 6, and we're pretty pleased with that. We are tasked to set fees that cover the cost of materials and services and no more. We cannot make a profit. When we make a profit, we either have to reduce fees or repurpose that money back to the students in a way of their choosing. So what this means, and these are based on average number of credits for our undergrad and graduate students, is our students save about $1,000 per year on textbook materials. We provide every textbook assigned, whether they open it or not, it's there for them. It is our job to advocate for our students in textbook affordability. And our students are great supporters of our program, and they provide critical feedback as to what we can do to add value to the program and to assure that we're working on the things that they find most useful to them. So here's my high-speed graphic that I put together. How do we do it? So as you notice, inclusive access is an important element of our program. To us, IA is neither inherently evil or exceptionally good. It's a delivery method of content that allows us to aid our students. But it is only a tool that we use to support them. You may notice a strange acronym on this slide, FAWIL. That, I think, is the most important aspect of our program, and it stands for our approach of finding affordability wherever it lives. That's truly what our goal is to make sure that we're constantly advocating for those students. Today, that might mean inclusive access is a benefit. Tomorrow, OER, or maybe something completely different 10 years from now, who knows, but being flexible enough that we can change and adapt as technology and resources change. So I want to quickly look at our familiarity with digital in IA. As mentioned earlier, over 80% of our content is delivered digitally. We delivered over 50,000 digital resources last year just here at Stout. And print has shrunken from a high of 85,000 units when I first started here down to only about 10,000 last year. And a particular note of interest I'd like to draw your attention to on this chart is the gray line, which indicates access code usage. We took over providing access codes for students in 2015, and there was about 1,000 access codes used per year. That's the homework platform type things, the MyLabs and McGraw-Hill Connects and things. It was up to over almost 8,000 last year. So we've seen a huge increase in the use of those particular kind of materials. The majority of our digital content is delivered currently through inclusive access. So what have we experienced in our long involvement with inclusive access? First, I want to touch on just some of the good points. It has helped us to reduce cost. Not initially. It really didn't, but volume and change in market prices recently have allowed us to reduce the cost over the years. We have been relentless about accessibility, and that has also, IA has allowed us to provide accommodations more easily. My office is actually responsible for providing textbook accommodations. I'm gonna I think I missed a slide there. I'll go back to it in a second to show you some of the services that we offer in addition to textbooks that students get for their fees. But faculty have the ability to change their resources more frequently than they did under our old print rental system. We had to keep books for 3 years to amortize the cost, and now they're able to change every semester if they so choose. And we've been also able to negotiate some true benefits for our students. And some of those benefits include UW system policy and UW Stout policy closely guard student information. And we are a watchdog on what is allowed to be used for student information. And we have not allowed vendors to be in the LMS or have access to that information if they weren't willing to abide by our rules. So that's been important. Also, not only have we pushed to have day one access for our students, but we've insisted that content be available for students 30 days prior to the start of classes. That way, if we have students that want to get a head start on reading their materials, or if faculty want to do course prep or whatever the case may be. So right now on August 4th, all of our content for the fall term that starts the Wednesday after Labor Day is ready to go for our students here at Stout. Also, about 70% of the content that we provide to our students digitally is now available with lifetime access. We've been continuing to negotiate for longer term access so that students have the ability to use those as reference materials as they go forward. Now, granted, lifetime access means different things to different publishers, but generally it means that students have access to their content at least for 5 years, which is helpful. And there have been other unintended benefits like text-to-speech and app access to materials that have helped students. Text-to-speech was really something that we pushed for very diligently for years for the accessibility aspect, but we've also found that text-to-speech is hugely popular with all students because they're able to listen to their textbooks as they're commuting, as they're doing other things, and it's been a really great boon. And also, kind of an unintended thing that's come of this is my office has become a firewall between the students and faculty and the publishers. Faculty chooses the content that is complete academic freedom. We have no say in that. Students use the content. We handle the setup, the troubleshooting, payment, and contract enforcement. So if somebody isn't doing what they need to do, I am not shy of saying, well, I have an invoice sitting here and I'm not paying it until we see some response to you taking care of our students and our faculty. But like anything, there are obstacles as well as good points. And a big concern is the increase, like I mentioned earlier, of the homework platform usage. Access codes, even with our discounted rates, make it very difficult to rein in cost. The more those increase, the more difficult it is. I have to find new ways to cut costs other places so that we can stabilize fees. It's also getting harder for institutions to deal directly with publishers. I know that I've seen this over the years. I'm a little concerned about this increasing lack of control over pricing agreements, because a lot of publishers are going through third-party vendors, and we've had good relationships, and I hope that I'm being worried about nothing, but it still makes little warning bells go off in my mind because there are harkens back to some of the pricing models that libraries have gotten into, and it's concerning to me. Print availability and frequent edition changes still seem to be an issue. And this really harkens back to the old print textbook models of things that we complained about print at the time. A lot of faculty are using textbooks that the content really doesn't change a whole lot, and they're being forced to change to editions more frequently. And it's really not as necessary as it seems from the operational end of things. But the most concerning obstacle to me is the future. What new products and choices are going to continue to affect our ability to serve students? I have a staff, including myself, of 3 people against thousands of people in the publishing and vendor arena that we have to monitor agreements, contracts, and things like that. And we're trained professionals. If we struggle to do it, how are students at other campuses that are forced to do it on their own able to handle those things on their own and keep things straight? It's really mind-boggling and really concerning to me. And these are just some of the observations from me as an affordability practitioner who works with this kind of stuff every day. I'm going to go back. I just wanted to show you this slide, show you some of the things that are included. I always like to mention the fact that at UW Stout, I consider us a true all-inclusive program, and that we were a long time before terms like all-inclusive or equitable access were even part of the industry. It's not, I'm not saying that in a derogatory fashion, but I want to just highlight the fact that in that $13.15 a credit for undergrads. For $39.45, our students are receiving their access codes, any print books assigned, any digital books assigned. If they have 10 books, they get them all for that same $39. And any other digital resources that we are assigning in lieu of textbooks that allow us to get rid of a lot of additional course fees. So this is why we consider inclusive access a little differently. And in my opinion, as we continue our conversation about inclusive access, it's important for you to see that, at least to us from our perspective here in Western Wisconsin, that IA involves much, much more than just providing content directly to students through a fee type system. So with that, I'll turn it back to Nicole, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all 3 of our speakers for that wonderful session. I'm thrilled that we have a solid 10 minutes for questions, so we will move to that. Let's get us all up on screen. So first up for questions, I'd like to give this one for Christine. Your perspective as a student and from your bookstore experience are very helpful. This is from Sam Chang. Do you have any suggestions for librarians or open education champions on how to talk to their bookstore about issues related to digital access to course materials and OER?
Thank you for the compliment. I definitely think that, and this is coming more from my experience working for the bookstore than directly as a student, I think that people look at the bookstore as an entity that wants to make money. And in the 4 years that I worked at the bookstore, and I've been involved in a lot of like leadership conversations, because I just ended up working for the bookstore so long that I was leader in the textbook department, there really is a genuine concern from the bookstore to help students a lot more than I feel like the faculty recognize. Like, it always seems to me in every conversation, even going from institution to institution with the same company, that the faculty in the bookstore couldn't see eye to eye. And it's kind of like when there's a divorced parent situation and the parents are fighting and they forget about the children. And it's really sad to me. And I hate to liken it to that. But because of that, students suffer because faculty is not willing to meet the bookstore's deadlines. The bookstore is not getting the exact copy of what the faculty is looking for. And so I guess my recommendation would be to really think about, what does the student need? Like, being a student-centered a group of individuals first, and approaching the bookstore in that way, saying, hey, I'm not attacking your business practices. I just want this to be the best for the student. Here's what I feel like is best for the student since I'm the instructor of this course, and here's the materials I need. What do you need from me to make that happen? And like, just how Mr. Butterfield explained that they do this well before the semester starts. Sometimes faculty members will send their wow, like I forgot what the wording is for that, but they will send their titles, I should say, to the bookstore like 2 weeks before class starts. So you cannot get upset with the student who comes into the bookstore 1 week before class starts because last week you didn't even have the book in there. And so it having those like open conversations, say, hey, we're going towards the same thing, we just have a different way of doing it. Can you please make sure that you're not telling my students to buy the standard overall, like the way it works in the bookstore is that if they don't get books from each department, they'll go to the dean. At least this was my experience. I don't say that for every bookstore, but they'll go to the dean and ask the dean for a blanket list of what everybody in English 1301 needs. And then once they do that, they'll just, any holes that they have, they just put it on the schedule. So even if that faculty member never said that they're using that book, students will come into the bookstore and then I'm instructed to tell them that it says on this paper that you need this book for this course. And it's probably because they're using something from OER or digital course material that's not in the bookstore, so they don't think to tell the bookstore that. And then now the student purchased the book they don't need, they have to come back and return it. Like it's just a very like tedious process. And so I think there just needs to be a lot more transparency between the faculty members or the department and the bookstore, because that's what's best for the student.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And I think after just hearing a little bit about University of Wisconsin Stouts program, it really does underscore how this type of program could work if it was sort of designed from the bottom up. And I think it just provides a really interesting example. So thank you for that, Christine. So next question, I think I'll ask Bob to address this first, but all panelists are welcome to respond. The question is, can panelists discuss any connections with and divergences from automatic billing strategies and the business strategies that brought about the serials crisis with academic journals and libraries? And then perhaps, Bob, if you can maybe address Barnes & Noble First Day program and other aggregator vendor-based programs and how that differs from your program.
Sure. So I'll answer the second part first. As far as the other programs, it's a little bit apples to oranges, just because we don't look for making a profit. Anything that we generate as a profit would go directly into, like the sale of withdrawn books. Any money I generate selling that to the used book market goes directly into purchasing content for our students and stabilizing fees. And really, it's a matter of choice and what works best for a particular campus or a particular situation. So I know that's not very much help, but it's kind of the cold hard truth. It kind of, what are you looking for in that approach? As far as the serials question, and I think I alluded to this a little bit in my introduction, it's very concerning to me. I think that this is a very huge problem for acquiring content for libraries, and I see the potential for setting up some of the same kind of concerns. I know I'm sure many of you saw the article about a publisher's approach to ebooks and making them non-fungible tokens that has come out in the last couple of days. You know, those kind of things really concern me. Here's the thing that boggles my mind, it always has. Our faculty are the sole creators of this content. Our students are the sole consumers. Why don't we have more say? And part of it is that we need to speak more with one voice, I think, campuses together across the country, and we need to reassert our position in this equation that, you know, we understand that you're trying to make money for your company, and that's understandable. That's what you're there for. But you need to be extremely aware of our concerns and the needs of our students, because we're here to protect them and make sure that it doesn't happen. So.
Can I just jump in quickly? I know there are other questions to get to, but, and I don't have the particulars, but in Texas, we have we've been doing some consortial negotiation with Elsevier through the Texas Coalition for United Libraries Action, I think is the name. We do the UT system has this phenomenal, with its 13 institutions, all the libraries in it already do consortium negotiation with large publishers of scholarly materials. And it's very effective, and the Texas Coalition sought to sort of take it larger. I mean, Texas is giant. So when you think about the sort of impact in the ways that the UC system has also done, and part of that negotiation is really around making more of the scholarship open and giving faculty control over their own intellectual property. It's a work in progress. Some of it's gone really well, but I will say that there is that similarity in Paige's question of the business model of the publishers in the textbook and course materials market, and then the giant scholarly publishers, and the ways in which, as Bob said, faculty create this stuff, and then either university has to pay to be able to share it with others. So this is, I think, the open movement is really trying to get everyone rowing in the same river in the same direction, and I think there's some good work ahead.
Fantastic. Yeah, I often say we've seen this movie before. And we've learned a lot from it. And I think having conversations connecting the two is really important. So really, really appreciate that question. So we'll only have time for one more and perhaps just a brief answer, but there were a few questions specifically about calculating savings and making sure that when we're doing that, we're being honest about what is actually being saved and what students would have otherwise spent. Rebecca, I'm wondering if you can respond a little bit to how UT approaches those savings calculations.
With immense differences based on each institution is doing. So sadly, I know there was a question about UT Austin's, I think, inclusive access campus-wide program. I don't have the information right now on how they calculate their cost savings. I know they take a number of factors and components into consideration as they do that, but I don't know what it covers, what it doesn't. But I could put whoever has the question and be happy to have them reach out to me and put them in touch with someone at UT Austin. In terms, I put a chat comment too, in terms of calculating cost savings around our open educational and low cost materials. At the moment, our institutions are doing that somewhat differently, dependent on their own methodologies and metrics that they have determined are meaningful. We have talked about in our Momentum on OER group getting to more, at least a couple of shared metrics around cost savings. I would never want to impose that on institutions. They need to do what is meaningful to them. And especially if you're a library dean, you're going to want to figure out how to maximize both savings for your students and also impact on your library. But this is something that I do think systemically across the country, it would be great to have a couple of shared metrics around this, and there are groups working on that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, there are so many other questions. There's a great one right now just about the decision to include access codes in mandatory student fees rather than opt-out fees that I wish we had time for, but unfortunately we do not. We are right at the top of the hour, so we're going to need to wrap up. So want to close by thanking our three panelists for sharing their perspectives, and also SPARC thanks our partnership with ACRL for sponsoring this event. And we will be posting this recording within the next week. So if you registered for this webcast, you will receive the link to that, and appreciate everybody who came and shared your views in the chat. All right. Okay, the recording is off.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks,
Is
Bob.
it off? No, it's
Thank
not.
you all.